Hey everyone, I'm Taylor Hudak with Activism Munich, and welcome back to another Julian Assange case update. A new documentary titled Not in Our Name premiered earlier this month during a Don't Extradite Assange campaign online event. The documentary, directed by John First, details the torture and suffering of Julian Assange. The DEA campaign then hosted a discussion with special guests, including the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer, and director John First. This film portrays a very important aspect of Assange's case, which is the torture he endured while in the Ecuadorian embassy. In May 2019, Nils Melzer, who was accompanied by two physicians, visited Assange in Belmarsh prison to examine his mental and physical health. Melzer, along with a medical forensics expert and psychiatrist, each examined Assange separately. They found that he exhibited symptoms consistent with psychological torture. Following the visit, Melzer issued a letter to the British government. At the beginning of the letter, Melzer correctly notes that any torture, cruel, or unusual punishment is absolutely prohibited under international human rights law, including the UN Convention Against Torture and the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Torture is defined by the UN as any act by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purposes as obtaining from him or a third person information or confession, punishing him for an act he or a third person has committed or is suspecting of having committed, or intimidating or coercing him or a third person, or for any reason based on discrimination of any kind. In February of this year, Melzer spoke with Activism Munich about the unfair treatment of Assange and how torture is used to psychologically break down a person.
I think it's very important to know that torture really is a psychological process. It is the instrumentalization of pain and suffering in order to coerce a person, to make them confess or to intimidate them or to punish them. But it's always, in the end, you're targeting the mind and the emotion of the victim. You can do it by causing physical pain and affect the mind through that avenue, or you can do it through psychological manipulation. Psychological manipulation, psychological torture really aims at destabilizing and destroying the individuality and personality of a person to the point where they break and their will becomes completely manipulated by the torturer. That obviously is what has been done to Julian Assange. You do that by first isolating the person completely from the environment and then exposing him to a completely arbitrary and threatening environment which overstimulates the nervous system to a point where he collapses.
In Melzer's letter to the British government, he states that from a physical perspective, Julian Assange's health, including his cognitive and sensory capacity, have been significantly impaired due to his prolonged isolation and confinement in the embassy. The lack of access to direct sunlight and appropriate medical care have greatly contributed to his declining health. Now, from a psychological perspective, Melzer and the two medical experts found that Assange demonstrated all of the typical symptoms one would have when experiencing extreme amounts of stress for a prolonged period of time. Melzer goes on to state that a clear and direct causal relation can be established between the serious psychological trauma and other medical symptoms observed and is well documented prolonged exposure to the following factors. A. Prolonged arbitrary confinement by the United Kingdom and Sweden. B. Public shaming and judicial harassment by Sweden. C. Coercive harassment and defamation by Ecuador. And D. Sustained and unrestrained public mobbing, intimidation, and defamation in the US, the UK, Sweden, and Ecuador. It's also important to note that in Article 3, Section 1 of the UN Convention Against Torture, it states, "No state party shall expel, return, or extradite a person to another state where there is substantial grounds for believing that he would be in danger of being subjected to torture." Melzer makes it clear that there is a great risk Assange will be subjected to torture if extradited to the United States.
And so I felt I needed to go and really investigate this case and take with me medical doctors to be sure to have an objective medical scientific assessment. And so I took with me two medical experts, a psychiatrist and a forensic expert, and we did this visit that everybody I think knows about, where we examined Julian Assange on the 9th of May 2019 in Belmarsh prison for 4 hours. And he clearly, and we examined him separately from each other. That's also important to know. So these were separate assessments, and we compared notes, and all of us agreed that he showed clear symptoms of psychological torture.
Melzer has also issued letters to the US, the Ecuadorian and Swedish governments, in addition to the UK. The UK government is required to respond to Melzer's findings as well as conduct an independent and impartial investigation into the case. It took the UK government several months to even respond. Over the past year, Melzer has become one of the most well-known advocates for Julian Assange. His duties as the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture require him to investigate allegations of torture. However, Melzer was not always in support of Assange. He admits that he too fell for what he calls deception in the mass media.
When I was contacted the first time in December 2018, when he was obviously still at the embassy, and his legal team contacted my mandate asking me to intervene on his behalf because they felt his living condition had become inhumane at the embassy, I had this visceral reaction of not getting involved and thinking, Assange, he's just going to manipulate my mandate, and this is this hacker and narcissist and rapist and so on. So I didn't really know much about the case. This was as I said, a visceral reaction. I actually looked at myself and I asked myself, where did I get my prejudice from? Had I known the case and, through my own research, come to a realization that, this case was not for me, that'd be different. But how could I react so instinctively? And then I really, as John just said, I really had to look myself in the mirror, and I owed it to my professional integrity to really look into this case a little bit. And I realized that I had been deceived. And I really, as a first statement, I'd like to put this out there. If you think Julian Assange is a hacker and a narcissist and a rapist, you're not to blame, because you have been deceived. If you think you have not been deceived, it means that the deception is working.
Nils Melzer's findings and contributions to the case are significant even beyond Assange's case, because not only does his report expose that the so-called democracies we live in violate human rights by causing, assisting, or contributing to torture and cruel punishment, but that when these governments are confronted with evidence of their own unlawfulness, nothing is done.
Sweden just rejected everything. Ecuador sent me very long letters, but not really engaging with any of my questions in a serious manner. The US obviously rejected everything. What we see here is really a denial of reality. And I was so struck by this, that this is possible with so-called mature democracies like Sweden, like Britain.
And with the second half of the substantive extradition hearing approaching, the support for Assange continues to grow. Just recently, local councils across Australia have called for Assange to be freed. Campaigners are encouraging local authorities around the world to encourage and ask for Assange's release. And in the UK, trade unionists in Birmingham, Plymouth, and Newcastle have voted to join the campaign to prevent his extradition. In Parliament, 19 UK MPs have tabled an early day motion on Assange, asserting their commitment to press freedom and public interest journalism.
Vivienne, just to your right, please. Vivienne, to your right.
Longtime Assange supporter Vivienne Westwood held a demonstration outside the Old Bailey in London on the day that U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visited the UK. Westwood, dressed in all yellow, was suspended 10 feet in the air in a bird cage to send a very public message in a canary in the coal mine protests. Many activists joined in on the protests to oppose Assange's extradition to the U.S.
Julian Assange, I am the canary in the cage. If I die down the coal mine from poisonous gas, that's the signal for all the miners to leave.
Julian's a freedom fighter who has been so totally abused by the illegal gaming of the law by governments. And it's a conspiracy to trap him, to make him an example to all journalists that they should never, ever expose the truth about America.
To add to the long list of awards, Julian Assange received the Stuttgart Frieden Press 2020 award, which is connected to the appeal to not only protect unconditional freedom of the press, but to also enforce it. Now, looking ahead, Assange's next call-over hearing is scheduled for July 27th, where he is expected to be in attendance. We will cover this hearing and keep you up to date as this case progresses, so please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you've missed a case update, you can get all caught up by visiting our Julian Assange Case Updates playlist. I'm Taylor Hudak with Activism Munich. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next report.